Welcome back, viewers. Alan, we were discussing Bolivar Revolution and the Latin America, and
Yes.
You said that it is not complete.
Yes.
Still, it needs to go on. Now, I add a further question. There's a lot of turmoil in Latin America. How you see, in general, the movement going to which direction you think it's heading?
Well, there's turmoil, not just in Latin America, there's turmoil on a global scale.
Yeah.
It's quite ironic, you know.
But it happened first, I believe.
Oh, yes, yes. No, Latin America was the start of it. I will remind you of something that Lenin said at the time of the Russian Revolution, where he said that in Russia, capitalism broke at its weakest link.
Yeah.
Which is logical. A chain doesn't break at its strongest link, but at its weakest link. Now, in Latin America, that's an interesting question. If you look at the figures for economic growth in the last 10 or 20 years, there's been considerable economic growth in Latin America, and this is put forward as a great success story. You see, the problem is this. This economic growth has not at all increased the living standards of the mass of workers and peasants and poor people in this vast continent with its huge resources. Of course, this subcontinent also has huge resources. There's been economic growth in this subcontinent in the last period. Has it benefited the mass of people in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh? I think not.
Didn't trickle down, you know?
The trickle-down theory, of course, is just nonsense. You know, actually, John Kenneth Galbraith, who's not a Marxist, but he made quite an amusing comment on that, on this monetarist theory. He says monetarism is the theory that all the problems of the economy is based on the fact that the poor people have too much money and the rich people don't have enough. That's the trickle-down theory. No, it's led to disaster. This theory has led to disaster. This system has led to a disaster for the peoples of the world. And of course, people will react. If you're having your living standards destroyed, your house is taken away, which is now occurring on a vast scale in the United States of America. People in the year 2009, in the wealthiest country on earth, millions of people are threatened with losing their home. Many of them are living in tents by the roadside. This is in the richest country in the world. Now, of course, people are going to react against that. In South America, there's been a big movement already in the past decade, not just in Venezuela, but in Bolivia, in Ecuador, where there's a left-wing government. In Mexico, there was a movement of millions of people against electoral fraud. I would say, I've said so before, that at this moment in time, there isn't a single stable capitalist regime in the whole of the South American continent, from Tierra del Fuego in the south to the Rio Grande in the north. Of course, this also will have effects in the United States itself.
Alan, coming back to this region and the poorer countries, so how this crisis on the world scale going to have its impact on the poorer world like Pakistan, India and the so-called third world?
Well, it must have a huge effect. I mean, people have to live at the end of the day. People need what I've said, roti, kapra or makan. It's absolutely certain. And the viability of any socio-economic system must be determined in the last analysis by its ability to provide these things. Now, in Pakistan and in India, the people have had so-called independence now for how long? 60 years?
Yeah, more than 61 years.
More than 60 years. Well, I would have thought that 61 years is long enough to show what the capitalist class can do for the people of Pakistan or for the people of India. Now, the Indians were boasting and bragging about their economic success and
Shining India.
All the rest of it, this marvelous thing. Yes, but for the millions of ordinary Indian workers and peasants, what does it mean? Have their living standards improved? They have not improved. I would say the same for Pakistan. Can we honestly say that the conditions of the people in Lahore are better now than what they were even 60 years ago? I somehow don't think so. And the problem here is a fundamental problem. It's a problem of a system which is not based on production for people's needs. They're not interested in producing houses or food or clothing, but for the profits of a few. A few people have done very well in Pakistan and in India and even in Bangladesh. Oh, incidentally, let me ask you a question. I'll ask your viewers a question. Who's the richest man in the world?
Well, again, it's Bill Gates, maybe?
Everyone thinks that. Bill Gates in America. Not so. The richest man in the world is Carlos Slim, who's a Mexican.
Oh.
So what am I trying to say? Well, I'm trying to say the so-called rich countries and the so-called poor countries. Well, in the so-called poor countries, there are very rich people. In Pakistan, there are very rich people who've done very, very nicely, but at the cost, at the expense of the masses. Now, this is intolerable. This cannot be accepted. I believe there's a colossal discontent. I believe we saw that discontent manifested in October 2007
yep.
with the return of Benazir Bhutto, something which I predicted, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
You might remember. When
I remember.
People didn't believe.
She herself didn't believe Benazir Bhutto was weeping when she...
I'm sure, yes, I'm sure. It was clear. And the question we must ask ourselves, this 2.5 million people, poor people, that came on the streets of Karachi to welcome Benazir Bhutto, why did they go? And I would suggest to you that what that reflects is, first of all, a profound discontent. People are not happy. People are not content. And a desire for change. A burning desire for a fundamental change in society. A desire which I think is completely justified. We saw that, I remember distinctly, 1968. I remember that distinctly.
And April 1986, when Benazir came.
Of course, of course. The people the ordinary people of Pakistan want a change. The question which I would ask is, do the leaders of the movement want to change? Are they really going to carry out a policy that the people...
So it's a crisis of the leadership.
I would say that it's a very big crisis of leadership, and not only in Pakistan.
Everywhere.
Let me give you another example, an even more striking example. The United States of America is the most powerful, it's the wealthiest country on earth, and yet there is profound discontent. There's profound anger among the people of America. That was reflected with the election of Obama, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, after all, just think. This was an earthquake. This is a political earthquake. Here is a country where people did not vote. People didn't vote. They were apathetic, and they were apathetic for very good reasons, because they couldn't see a fundamental difference between the parties. Incidentally, I think they might end up like that in Pakistan. If people can't see a fundamental difference between the parties, of course they'll become very discontented and apathetic. That will be reflected outside Parliament then, in movements of a different sort, revolutionary movements, I would say.
You just mentioned Obama, and people have a lot of hopes, and here a lot of romanticism, and they're very romantic about Obama and what he would do. Do you think he would deliver, and whatever the expectation, because the expectation level is very high. He had 80% approval rating. So is it going to stay like that, or?
Well, Sarkozy in France also had a very high rating. He is now the most unpopular leader in the history of France. And only last week there was a movement in France of 3 million French workers on the streets. I think that Sarkozy has his days numbered. George W. Bush also was popular. He was elected. He ended up the most unpopular president in history. What about Obama? Well, it's true, Obama is a much more intelligent man than George Bush. That's not very difficult, by the way. I think it would be difficult to find someone less intelligent than George Bush. But Obama, certainly the style of Obama is different. The problem is, you see, that style doesn't put any bread on the table. Words are cheap. We have an expression in English, I don't know if you can translate this, fine words butter no parsnips. Fine words don't put any food on the table. Obama is much cleverer than George Bush, yes. But you see, he is a capitalist politician. And in the last analysis, he is defending the same system, the same interests. I think this was put very well by a man that I admire very much, America's greatest living author. You must have read his books. Gore Vidal wrote a very true thing. He said, our republic, referring to the United States, our republic has one party, the property party, with two right wings, referring to the Democrats and the Republicans. There is no fundamental difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. They both reflect the interests of big business, and therefore it is impossible that Obama could A, solve this economic crisis, or really act in the interest of the people. So at a certain stage, I would predict quite firmly, there will be a very severe reaction against Obama. However, this will take some time because of the hopes. People hope that things will change, hope that things will be better. It's natural. But this man is a capitalist politician, and therefore he will carry out capitalist policies.
Alan, we live, of course, in a globalized world, and you know this economy that has brought people together, and the barriers were. We live in a shrunk world. How do you see the movement? Is it going to be a world movement now? Because on internet we are passed on information in a matter of seconds. So has it brought even the working class together to react to what's happening to them?
That's a very interesting question. The first thing I would say is that globalization is not a new idea. The capitalist economists put this forward as being the latest innovation. As a matter of fact, globalization was predicted 150 years ago, over 150 years ago, by Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto. Marx explains that the capitalist system begins as a national market, but inevitably it develops as a world market and a world economy to which every national market is ruthlessly subordinated. Now, this is a fact. It was predicted 150 years ago. Globalization is the most important fact of our epoch. No country can escape from the pull of the world market at this stage. Now, they thought that this was going to solve their problems. Initially, it did help them for the last 10 or 20 years in particular. This colossal expansion of world trade did benefit the rich, the capitalists, creating new markets, new fields of investment, and so on. That's true. However, now, it didn't abolish the contradictions of capitalism. It reproduced them on a far vaster scale. And therefore now, globalization manifests itself as a global crisis of capitalism. Now, your question, I think, is very pertinent. This must have a profound effect on working people who are the main victims of this. The rich are not the victims. They complain and they moan and that their profits are going down. Well, the profits might be going down, but they're still very wealthy people. The real people who suffer, the real victims of this, the innocent victims of this terrible system, are millions of ordinary working people, workers, peasants. Unemployment is increasing in all countries. They're closing factories. They're privatizing. They're attacking living standards everywhere. Now, this must provoke a response. And I believe, in the same way that it's a global economy, and therefore a global crisis, there must be also, and there will be, a global response of ordinary people, of workers, of peasants, of revolutionary youth, of progressive intelligentsia on a world scale. And I'm absolutely certain that the ideas of Marxism, of communism, of socialism, again, are coming to the fore. This is already happening, by the way, on a world scale.
We'll take another break and we'll come back and we'll continue. We'll be back after a brief break.